Welcome everyone. It's good to see you and thank you for choosing to participate first in council as leaders today and then a special welcome to join us today in this workshop on welcome. My name is Kathy Chatelaine. I serve as assistant to the bishop in global ministry, so one of Bishop Hasnelli's assistants. And today, you'll hear a little bit from me, but mostly from my colleagues here who will be talking about sponsorship ministry. There's going to be some information that we'll give you, and then please, as they are speaking, jot down your questions, because at the end we'll have time for questions and answers. Okay, thank you. I'm going to give you, to start off, just a brief overview of the ministry that the sponsorship ministry, or the ministry of welcome to refugees and asylum seekers within the Southeastern Minnesota Synod, about the ministry that is a part of. Sponsorship ministry is just one piece of the greater ministry of Amparo. How many of you have heard of the Amparo ministry? Yeah. Some people, yes, some people know. It's an acronym for accompanying migrant minors with protection, advocacy, representation, and opportunities. Amparo started in 2016, was instituted by Church-wide Assembly in 2016, August, which happened to be the first month that I started in this position. And in 2016, as you remember, it was also the time of a pretty divisive presidential campaign, that divisive enough that it even caused, according to what I was hearing from pastors, some divisions within congregations. And you may remember that. And with that, then, the Amparo team decided to go what we say in Swahili, pole pole, step by step. And then August or summer of 2018 happened. And in 2018, the news reports of children being separated from their parents hit the news cycle. And there were a couple calls into the Synod office by people from very, very small, very rural congregations, saying, what is the Synod doing about this? This is inhumane. And I asked, well, yes, what are we, 117,000 people in the Southeastern Minnesota Synod, what are we doing about this? And within a few days, $3,000 came from these two very small rural congregations. And so connected that 100% of those funds, because 100% of what any individual or congregation gives to a designated global fund, Tanzania, Colombia, South Sudan, Amparo, Hunger, goes directly to that ministry, no overhead costs. So the ministry that we partnered with then was Peace Lutheran Church in Las Cruces, New Mexico, who have been welcoming people who are migrating, who are fleeing their countries because of political, social persecution, violence. There are 5 different categories of why a person can seek asylum. That had been the ministry of Peace Lutheran Church with their organization, Border Servant Corps. And so they then welcome families into their congregation for 1 to 3 days as the families are making their way to their sponsor in the interior part of the United States. So we started really activating with that donation and that connection, and there was a group of 5 people from our Synod who traveled to Las Cruces and El Paso in January of 2019. And in your brochure, if you open, it's listed on the Amparo timeline highlights. And then in 2020, 2 other groups from the Synod traveled to the U.S.-Mexico borderlands, visiting Border Servant Corps, still in the church in Prince of Peace in Las Cruces, and then also the ministries of El Paso for a border immersion. And through the stories from all three, in 2019, it was pre-COVID, so we had the privilege of being able to travel throughout the Synod, telling the story, telling what we learned about immigration. And 2020 group were right on the verge of it, and then all of the congregations stopped meeting in person because of COVID. And so then we lived into technology with webinars. And through that time of COVID, the Amparo ministry has grown from supporting and partnering with our friends, our ministry partners at the border, to actually living into ministry here within the Southeastern Minnesota Synod. So if you open up this brochure, you are going to see some of the ministries that we're engaged in. And it falls under a few different categories. One is advocacy, another is education, whether a visit to the US-Mexico borderlands to participate in a border immersion experience, that's an education. The God Who Sees book study, amazing book that we did online during the time of COVID, and now has been written up and available for your congregations to use. Just email me and I can email you the packet that you can use with the book. A migrant journey, interactive experience where kids, it's usually youth in the confirmation programs, but it can also be adults who take on the roles of people who have to flee their community so that they live, and then their journey north from Central America country to the US-Mexico border, and who they meet along the way. People take on different roles in that, and questions and discussion happens. And with that, interwoven is the history of immigration within the United States and what it is currently, which, as you can imagine, I have to update what happens at the US-Mexico border every few months because things change on a dime with border politics and laws. Immigration law is the second most complicated law in the United States, with the number one being tax code. That's right. So as you can imagine, things, just to keep up to date with that. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. They would be at the desk. Okay. Yes. In the blue folders. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Kathy, is this handout available online for our friends?
If you could get their email, I'll email it to them.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. So education, another opportunity, advocacy, education, and the third, there are many, but the third category that you see of all of this is the sponsorship ministry. And that's our panel today, is because we could have a panel on border visits, and that's all well and good. And we could have a visit on the God Who Sees or the migrant journey. But today, because there is such interest, I receive now probably a phone call or an email every week to every other week from congregations saying, okay, we hear there are congregations in our synod who are welcoming people, refugees, asylum seekers into their community. How do I do this? And so the team for council visit leaders asked if we would put this information on. So in sponsorship, there are a couple steps. One is you're going to hear from 3 different communities today who are engaged in sponsorship ministry. There are 2 other communities that are deeply involved as well. But you'll hear that some of these communities had the time to take and discern. They had felt this call for a while, whether it was through an LIRS Synod presentation, Lunch and Learn back in August, of 2022, or if it was a community, a group of Lutheran churches who were asked by another group in their community who are already sponsoring refugees and asylum seekers and saying, hey, are you interested? And this group of congregations wanted to find out more information, so they discerned. A third group you're going to hear from today got an email to people I knew who were had the heart and had expressed, oh, we might be interested someday. And within 3 days, they welcomed somebody. 0. I mean, the preparation was a 1-hour Zoom meeting the day or so before, or it was a Zoom and face-to-face, the day or so before the people arrived at the Minneapolis-St. Paul airport. So there's a discernment process, which I highly recommend, or there's spontaneous, come on in. Both are spirit-led. You're also going to hear about the organization around it, like if we walked through in preparation, are you going to start with Synod and then go with Catholic Charities, who is the sponsorship group that is assigned to Southern Minnesota? Or are you going to get your support from Synod Network, which is growing? And then it's actually getting ready. Is there a place to live? Do you have a core group of optimally at least 10 people who will gather together and then be chair people of all these other working groups? There's just a lot of organization and getting ready. And if you can imagine trying to get ready in 24 to 72 hours and activate, and then reality hits, you know, once everyone is settled in a little bit, and then it's like, oh, what do we do? They're going to talk about today, what did we do and what are we continuing to do and what are we continuing to learn? So again, you're going to hear from people who are really engaged now in this, what we call the long welcome. Because it isn't just for a couple weeks and it isn't just for a couple months. The commitment is 6 months to 2 years. And 6 months is probably very, very unrealistic by the national, like LIRS and Episcopal Migration Ministry and all these people who work at the national level. They say 6 months to 2 years. And we're going, 6 months? How does that happen, right? So, yeah, please jot down your questions as you are meeting people and as you hear their story. They're going to be sharing today about their congregations and their communities ministries. The panelists cannot and will not be able to answer questions about specific families, specifics about situations. And that is out of respect for the individuals and the families, especially as they're walking through this very complicated asylum process. It is national U.S. law and international law that people within our world can enter the United States, and when they are on U.S. soil, say, I need asylum. And this is why I need asylum. That is under U.S. law and international law. You probably don't hear that from many news sources. All of these people are what we often hear as documented. They are legally here. They are also some of the most vetted people in our nation. They're vetted unless somebody here serves on the CIA, don't tell us, or because you can't, or FBI or that. The people that these people are connected with, are sponsoring, are the most vetted. Their DNA and biometrics have been through Interpol, have been through CIA, FBI, all of those channels to check for a criminal background. And they would not be in our communities if anything was uncovered.
Kathy, I have one question. Maybe I'm operating under a false assumption here. But I had heard that yes, if they present themselves at an official port of entry and seek asylum, they can go through the process. If they cross the border at a other location, they might not necessarily be treated the same way. But if they seek asylum, saying they cross the border, let's say, at not a port of entry, but they don't do it at Juarez or Nogales or wherever, they may not be treated, they would be treated as violating the law for entering the country illegally, or can they still claim asylum after they
They
do
can
that?
still claim asylum because they have made contact with a border patrol agent. That is, so if they have their papers, they get that from Border Patrol or from Custom and Border Protection, they go through all of those processes I just outlined. Yeah. And it's very complicated. So write down your questions, hold them to the end, because you are now going to hear from our panel members. They're going to share, first of all, their name, congregation, and community, as well as how they first heard generally about the Amparo Ministry of Welcome. You want to start?
Sure.
All right.
So I'm Pastor Mike. I'm the pastor at Central Lutheran in Winona. I heard about Amparo. I think that might have been. I went to one of the ELCA churchwide. I think it might have been that one that we voted on that. So I knew of Amparo, and so when it got to the point when we were looking at possibly talking about what do we want to do, this is how I got called Kathy and found out a little more deeply what not only Amparo is, but what our synod is doing. So.
My name is Pastor JC. I am the associate pastor at Bethlehem Lutheran Church in Mankato, and the group that I'm representing is called Welcome. We are a group of 5 Mankato area congregations that decided to band together and work together to do the ministry of accompaniment together. So full disclosure, I just started at Bethlehem in October, but the group had already been doing some of that discernment work that Kathy was talking about earlier, starting back in August of 22. Yeah, what year is it? 22, August of 22, before I came. So, but this, and so personally, I had heard about Amparo Ministries as a rostered leader at various synod events and things. My father was actually a voting member at the churchwide, at the CWA where Amparo was first begun. So I had heard about it and at a whole bunch of various events, but this kind of the first time I've really dipped my toes into that ministry as well. And as I said, the group themselves was learning about it starting back in that meeting in August.
Hi, I'm Jane Rothheimer. I am a member at Bethel Lutheran Church in Northfield, and I'm also a family physician in Northfield. I think I heard about Amparo. Well, I was some churches close by, so Cannon Falls and Denison had done took the Border Servant Corps, and so my husband and I, especially from the medical standpoint, were interested in how we could maybe be involved in helping at the border, and so we went and learned about Border Servant Corps, and then actually recently took a trip there ourselves, and then our congregation has sponsored a family, so and you'll hear about that. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Mimi De Rosas, and I work at Bethel Lutheran Church in the office as the office administrator. I learned about the ministry of Amparo maybe 3-4 hours before leaving my day at work that day. And it's been fulfilling.
Thanks and welcome. Thanks for saying yes. Okay, next question. Anyone can start on this. Briefly describe your congregation's or your community's process in this journey of sponsorship, and include how your team, that core team, was formed.
Well, Central has been a part of the group probably longer than the others. There was a couple of groups in town who had welcomed, people from Nicaragua and a couple other places. And, they came to me and said, we heard of another family who needs some sponsorship. Is Central willing to do that? And, so that kind of kicked us into gear, and I worked with, the Faith Lutheran Church is also, in Winona, and a couple other close, churches, as well as a couple, the UCC Church and Presbyterian. And we said, can we do this? And we started kind of having the conversation about what does this mean, with the other, people. Just a little while after that, we found out that that family no longer needed a sponsor, but at least they kicked us into gear of trying to say, okay, what would we do and how could we do that? And so, for us, it kind of came out of, so most of the group that I work with are members of either my church, Central Lutheran, or Faith Lutheran in town, or one of the other Lutheran churches. And, so it's pretty much a Lutheran, group that has come together to welcome someone. So.
And you welcomed,
And so we welcomed a gentleman from, Columbia, back in December of 21. So we've been walking alongside him now for a little over a year. So that whole, when she said, it takes 6 months, 2 years. Well, we're over a year into it, and he's just now getting to the point where, we just got his paperwork so he could work, actually have a legal job. So, it takes time, and he's still working on getting a driver's license and all those things that one needs to be able to get around. So, so we've now walked with him a year and we helped him through all of that process. So yeah, it takes time, and we know that we're still a long ways off of, working with his attorney that we got for him to work through the legal process to get all the paperwork done. So, yeah, I'm not sure what the
that's good.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so for our group in Mankato, as I had mentioned earlier, it started in that August of 22 with the lunch and learn that was hosted by Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services. And so that's when this group kind of started to talk together and go through that discernment process of, do we want to do this work together? Who are our partners in this? We had literally just gone to our congregational councils, and they had agreed that, yep, we want to be a part of this group. We want to work together to do this work. And we're just starting the process of learning what are our next steps? How do we go about doing the work of accompaniment? And I think it was literally the next day. The next day, we got a call from Kathy on behalf of one of our partners in Synod at the border saying there's a family from Nicaragua who they're going to be, it was a Friday, and they're going to be coming to the Minneapolis airport on Saturday. Are you able to help out? And so we decided, okay, we're going to learn as we go along and build the ship as we go. And so we made it work, and we found ways to find shelter for them in the immediate. One of the members of our team is actually here today who opened her home to them. And we were able to find a way to get them from the airport, find it. Of course, this was a week before Christmas that they came. So of course it's December in Minnesota, it's cold. It's been a very cold winter. So we found car seats, we found jackets, hats, mittens, all of that. And we, within about 24 hours, figured out what we were doing. And, and we're able to welcome that family. So that was kind of our process.
Pastor JC, can you name the congregations who are partnering together?
Yeah, so in the welcome team, the 5 congregations are Bethlehem Lutheran, where I'm from. And we also have Grace Lutheran of Mankato, Messiah Lutheran of North Mankato, Calvary Lutheran of Rapidan, and who am I missing? Christ the King of Mankato as well, are the 5 congregations that are working together.
Okay, well, we were a similar situation to Pastor JC as far as kind of a short notice, and I'm not even sure, Kathy, how it came about that we got chosen, but basically I think that we had a core group of people that were going to the border and had kind of a strong mission and justice committee and focused interest in immigration. And We also had a man in our congregation who had opened up the basement of his home, that he had an apartment with the kitchen, and he was willing to take in the family. So,
And you had, the office administrator
Yes.
who is fluent in Spanish.
yes, there's been,
And there were a lot of pieces there.
yeah.
And a
Yeah.
very persuasive pastor,
Yeah, true, yep. And a very generous congregation.
very gentle.
And so, yeah, anyway, that it was a short notice like you guys, and we pulled together, I think, thinking about who your welcome committee is gonna be is really important. I think, and Pastor Inger was the main person, I don't know, Mimi, you maybe, or a part of this, but, first of all, who are the people in our congregation who speak Spanish? That was, I think, one of the things, half of our welcome team are Spanish speakers. And also, we try to get different areas, like, I'm a medical person, so I can help with trying to, get medical care lined up for the family. We have, people who focus on education, how do we get the kids into school? Mimi mentioned social work, we don't have that on our committee, but that would be awesome. So thinking about people's expertise, not just people who have a passion or have language skills, but who have different expertise in these areas. And then also people who have time, we realized we had people of probably 50 and under were our group, and we said, we actually need some retired people who have some time to do like transportation of the family and things like that. So it's definitely been also a learning journey, but yeah, so far so good. I don't know, maybe what would you add?
Probably not too much more. I agree on all of it. Having our core team is great, and having other people be bilingual and other people stepping up. One thing in this journey, I have found that how the church is so giving, so that's been a great point, helping the family move on.
A piece that each of these groups, congregations and communities also did, as well as the two communities that are not here today. They also looped in and from the beginning, their council president and then the council. That's another key step, is to connect with council. That part of the leadership of the congregation. That's critical.
Ideally, you would have the 2 months to get organized, get your committee together, raise money, get funds in an account. That would definitely be ideal.
Yeah.
And recognizing that and knowing the importance of this. The global ministry table has passed a resolution, whatever we call them, in the global ministry table. Mike Valerius is chairperson, who's right here in the corner, and saying that if a congregation requests it, there's a one-time gift of $1,000 for the congregation to help with whether housing expenses or legal expenses, whatever the need is. Just because whether you have 24 hours, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, there still are unexpected expenses. And that is, we believe in this, we support it, and we want to be present financially. And that money comes from the generosity of individuals and congregations throughout our synod who give to the Amparo Fund, and in a couple of the communities, from mission support dollars that we had as a table at the end of 2022 that we could disperse. So, every congregation in our synod has then contributed a small amount to this ministry, which, thanks be to God, this is, I think, spirit within living, moving within our communities. So what has been the most rewarding in this journey that you're on? Mimi, do you want to start?
Yeah.
All right.
I think one thing is just watching how the family has grown, support-wise, coming out of their shell, watching and learning how they're maneuvering within the community themselves. just seeing them thrive, you know, being here, so it's been a great point.
Yeah, I think, just knowing that, well, just, it's a new friend, right? It's a new friend for me, for people in our congregation. I mean, just, you know, we were over one morning doing some things around their new home, and the mom had made quinoa, you know, and we've been talking about quinoa because I taken her to the grocery store, and that's, you know, from their country, Peru. And so she had made this breakfast quinoa that was incredible. And she, for all of us who were there setting up the TV, et cetera, you know, she pulled it out and she served it to us. And I mean, I don't know, just to have, you know, learning about a different culture, having new friends. I mean, it's been a blessing for our congregation. This family comes to our Wednesday night bistro and helps cook in the kitchen, and so yeah, just the relationship has been awesome. So yeah.
I mean, it's just, I say, seeing how the community and particularly Central has welcomed the gentleman from Columbia. But also the fact I've always been about trying to work together with other congregations and other groups, and you know how we've come together in this effort. Not only with the congregations that we work with, but the other groups that have welcomed migrants and others within the town. And then there's an organization called Project Find in Winona. Then that's been their whole mission for 30 years or whatever they've been in existence, and they've been a great resource too for us, because they have some of the interpreters. They have some people who helped us through some of those you know, questions that we had about how do we deal with certain things. So finding the resources in town as well
Connects you more with your community.
Yeah.
I'd say just incredible joy. There's just so much joy that just spills out everywhere with all of the interactions that with members of our team have had with the family, and just watching the joy that the family that we're accompanying has, because the dad and the older child love the snow. Who would have ever thought that? Watching them enjoy the snow, or we had an opportunity to celebrate the birthday of one of the family members together with our team, and just the joy of being able to eat cupcakes together and be in each other's presence, and the incredible amount of generosity of the surrounding communities too. We had a drive to try to find furniture for the apartment that the family just recently moved into. So we set up a whole Google Doc to track all of the donations, because we're tracking it across 5 congregations. Within 24 hours, it was full, and we had everything that we needed in 24 hours. It's just incredible. Just the joy that is exploding everywhere among everyone who has been involved.
What's been the most challenging aspect of this ministry, of this journey?
I think for me, we had to find some people who were enough bilingual, but then Google Translate worked very well, so we figured that out. I think one of the frustrations, not only for us, but for the gentleman we welcomed, is we're just in learning about the process and the slow process that it is going through the immigration stuff, and how the immigration system in our country just doesn't work well. And both frustration on our part as we try to help him through, and for him trying to get through this, you know, for a whole year he wanted to work, he wanted to do something, and you know, of course we're like, you can't do that, you know, so just some of that frustrations.
Yeah, because the learning about the process and the way that the process works kind of mind went to as well, because our team has been learning about that, because our family that we're accompanying, they're just beginning the process, and so we're just in the beginning stages of learning and just discovering, you know, that we have to be so incredibly careful with our words. We have to be so incredibly careful with the things that we do, because we could potentially jeopardize their asylum seeking process and so it's been quite the learning curve for us, and it can be very challenging, not just legally, but just emotionally too. So,
I think a couple of things. One is, there's a large amount of trauma in a lot of these situations. And I think that we're not privy to that information. It's private, but we also, it also impacts the situation. And, so just trying to get help for that and honor that. And, I think, the other thing I would say is financially, we had a housing situation arranged kind of temporarily through this man in our congregation, but then within, a month and a half or so, I was like, okay, I need to move to our next step. But then we had to find housing, which, and we've always heard Northfield doesn't have affordable housing. Well, wow, they don't have affordable housing. So we ended up working with our community action center, but still we're paying $1,000 a month for housing. So, and one thing that I've taken away from even talking to you guys is, we have not partnered with other congregations, but we've talked about that especially the UCC has had some interest, but we need to connect with our other two Lutheran churches probably to help, because, $1,000 a month, and like you guys said, they can't work it's probably going to be a year. They say 150 days, but the immigration process is so slow. So you almost have to plan at least for a year, where you're basically supporting this family with every financial need they have. So that was a little frightening when we didn't have anywhere to go and they were living in a hotel for about a week. That was a low point, but we got money from the Synod, and people were very generous, and the CAC came through with some housing. But yeah, so it's nice to prepare that ahead of time, I think.
Yeah, I would echo on also about the immigration process, how slow it is. And like Dr. Jean had mentioned, when the people are coming, some have some trauma issues with that. So, previously I worked at Rice County, I worked at the Community Action Center. And that's one piece that I like about that is I brought a lot of ideas, and it was a matter of, oh, we can go here, oh, I know this place, so that's been great. But newer things like the trauma stuff, being as close as I am to the family, sometimes I hear other stuff that maybe I wish I would, but to be working to help them, it's good to listen, and then to help them navigate to reach out to outlets. I have this, I need to go here now. So that's great. Other things, I think the driving issue.
Yeah.
We have so many, and I understand this, regulations on who cannot drive, but, being there. I'm not an asylum seeker, I'm born here in the United States, but I can relate a lot to this case, a lot to the family. So just giving them peace of mind, be patient, good things will come at the end. But it's hard for them to hear, it's easier said than done, so that's been the frustrating part.
Yes.
Will it be easier for them with the recent change in Minnesota law?
I mean, they should be able to get at least get their driver's license, so when they are able to work, they will be able to
Yeah.
To drive.
get to the job,
It's
right?
gonna be huge.
But it's still for them, the gentleman we welcome, he's taken the test now 3 times in Spanish, still hasn't passed it. And he had a driver's license in Colombia, so I mean, it's not like he's been so, right, there's some of that as in talking to one of our members who's helping him with it, it's just, the way they ask questions, right? They ask it in a way that doesn't connect for him. So it's helping understand what question they're truly asking, right? So it might be easier, but they still gotta pass the test, we gotta do,
And buy a car and pay.
Well,
for
right,
it.
then you got the right. Yeah. It's just navigating all this.
And that should open up in October of this year, and so that we actually celebrated that together, saying, hey, this is happy, this is what they came from, so yes.
In this experience, how have you encountered the living Christ?
I think for us, it has to do, I mean, in a couple different ways, right? Just the way in which our congregation, the community has opened their arms and opened their hearts to welcoming him and helping him and do whatever they could. As well as the other immigrants that we know that have been welcomed in town. I mean, he is very, just in his, all the things he's done, he's always gracious and thankful about when people help him. So yeah, it's in him too. So.
I guess I would say that the way that community has been formed through this experience, not just for the family getting connected with other members of our community, but the ways that it has brought us as 5 different congregations together, and we've gotten to know the family and their friends. They become friends, and just all other members of our congregation outside of our core team who have gotten to meet the family too. And there's a person from one of the congregations who her husband is a man from Nicaragua, from the same country. And so we've been able to have them meet each other and become friends and form community. And so just the way that it affects the whole community in a positive way by building relationships. And that's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
Have they become all members of your church now and converted to Lutheran?
Well, we're 5 different congregations, so it would be interesting to see them become members of all 5 congregations.
that's part of the sponsorship too, as a congregation, or it's part of the best practices of the national, like, Episcopal Migration Ministries and other ministry groups, LIRS, and that we embrace each person as a child of God, regardless, and we're not here to say, join our church. And I also know that the people, from hearing anecdotal stories, are present in the different churches, whether in Winona, in Mankato, Northfield. I mean, they're present. And there probably will never be an invitation, but if the family asks or the individual asks, there'd be, they would be able.
I think we welcome, I mean, he's at Central probably 3 out of the 4 weeks in the month. And then the other one, he's usually one of the other 2 churches. I mean, he was a somewhat practicing Catholic, I understand, when he came, but he's been mostly with us, more out of, I think, because the people who surrounded him. But yeah, I mean, so maybe unofficially he's been a member, but yeah, officially pretty much, I mean, that way. So I guess it'll be up to him, however that works out. I mean, just in seeing anecdotally how other groups in town who have welcomed migrants and immigrants long before we did. I mean, sometimes they're still in town after a number of years, and some of them have moved on after a few months. There was a couple of groups in town that welcomed some Afghan refugees, and we welcomed like 3 or 4 families. Some of them have already moved on to another town, and the other couple are still around. But so yeah, I think that's just kind of a side benefit, I guess. I mean, it's not its expectation, but I think it has allowed for some of my members and some members of the other congregations. It's allowed them to get plugged in a way that they haven't maybe plugged in the past. So maybe not the family who's come, but for some of our members, allowed them to be more involved.
I know one thing that I've been a volunteer at Border Servant Corps for the last 2 years, and part of the instruction to be a volunteer there is that there will be no proselytizing
Yeah.
or encouraging them to become Lutheran, because that's not the job for a servant corps. It's just to accompany them and get them on to the next step. And they don't need, they need to be fed and clothed and housed until they go on to the next step of their journey. So.
I think it's what you said, Pastor Mike, it's huge though. Our welcome committee, we ended up choosing a few people that aren't even members of our congregation, but just, you know, people in the community who can help us. And, or our frequent visitors, young woman with young kids who, you know, is from Peru or had lived in Peru. And so I think, yeah, it's drawn in new people, younger people that are passionate about this ministry. So that's been cool.
Yeah, and it's the same for us too. We have members of the wider community as a part of our core team and not just members of the 5 congregations. And so for us, you know, we're in the process of introducing the family to each of the 5 congregations and they can choose to participate at whichever one of the 5 congregations they want to, whenever they want. They're welcome at any time, but we don't choose for them. It's up to them to decide. So, but we're giving them the equal opportunity to at least meet each of the 5 congregations.
From the panelists, anything else about have you or how have you encountered the living Christ in this experience?
Well, just the sheer generosity of people in our congregation. We have a women's Bible study on Thursday mornings called Fab, and same thing like you guys. We just put out a list of, you know, to basically furnish an entire apartment, entire kitchen. And I mean, it was done, the stuff that was coming in. Mimi had all this stuff piling up at her desk. And these women are just so excited, you know, to be doing this. So it was, I don't know, you know, and it comes back to you equally as you're giving it from the family. So.
For me, it would be to see once again a generosity. I see it so much now, especially where I work at, but also I see it, I think the family sees it more, that something good has happened to me and I deserve it. That's great.
In Matthew 25, Jesus says, and I'm paraphrasing, but feed the hungry, welcome the stranger. And through this ministry and through the on the ground part of the ministry, there really is that welcome, that Matthew 25 welcome. And for me, I very rarely get to be in that on the ground welcome. I need to stay a little in a different space for many different reasons. But with that, for me, it was that week before Easter when first the email came and then the phone call came about we have a family. And from that email, 10 pastors.
Christmas.
Yeah. Oh, I said Easter, Christmas. You know, blank, right?
Yeah.
You know? Sorry, because this makes sense better.
I know, I know.
Thank you, Sally. You gotta live with me. Anyway, but with that, you know, we have this family, their sponsor fell through, put it out to 12 different pastors. And within 12 hours, I had, yes, we will, yes, we will, yes, we will. And we only needed one. Okay. And then 2 days later, I get a call from Mika from Border Serving Corps, 5 o'clock at night. I'm reading a book. I just finished my work week and I'm just, you know, we have a family whose sponsor fell through and they're showing up tomorrow at the Minneapolis airport. Do you know of a shelter in Minneapolis? Well, I haven't lived in Minneapolis for 35 years, and I called the people in Mankato, 2 pastors, and immediately, yes. And the other pastor, yes. And then they called Shelley, who had the house, yes. And within 45 minutes, I could call Mika back and say, yes, with tears streaming down my face, because here's the Christmas thing. There was room at the end, right? It's a way we've encountered Jesus here in very real ways and continue to as we walk this. Are there questions as I'm mindful of the time? Any questions? Yeah.
I have one. I have a 21-year-old Spanish gal that grew up in the southernmost town in Mexico working for me, right? We communicate with the phone. Wonderful translator. I asked her why so many people are trying to get into our country, right? And her answer was just, it kind of woke me up and realized that we're not doing the right thing here. We need to work harder. I don't, before meeting her, I saw on the news the border situation, right? And it, depending on which side of the fence you're on who's doing what's wrong, and nobody's doing anything right. They're making it very difficult to get them into this country. Everybody needs help working, and nobody wants them there,
No.
Right.
She's the most wonderful worker I've ever worked with. She's so willing. She said something to me that blew me away about a month after we worked together. She said, "Thank you, Tom, for not exploiting me." What? Who would say that? Somebody that's been exploited. What have you learned is the reason people want in here? Because I don't think we're letting the people know why they want to come here. Why is everybody trying to run away from their own country?
Well, we learned a couple things. Well, let me do one thing I thought of. I want to make sure that you all know, then I'll answer what you said real quick. One is, I'll suggest, take people in groups who want to support you however they can. They say, we have 5 or 6 congregations. 2 of them only support us financially because they have foundations or whatever. They say, we really don't have, we're a bunch of old, as the pastor said, we're a bunch of old people, we don't have these, we can't do that. But having a couple other congregations who can't, they don't really have the financial, but that's where the work will come from. So take wherever you can, and don't expect that everybody's gonna be able to do everything. Because it takes the village, right? I was part of the border with immersion thing, half a dozen other people here. And the quick answer was, they told us there's 2 reasons they come. They're either push or pull. They're either pushed because they're being harassed, they're being whatever by gangs or by the government or whatever, or they're pulled because they see no future. And however they get into the United States, there's a better future. So they're either push or pull. And it has more to do with what's going on there than here, but yeah, but they see this is the place to come. So
That's what this gal said to me. She said that they were in fear for their lives because they were going to be captivated and either been sold into slavery and the women into the sex trade. Pretty simple. And what are we doing sitting here?
yeah.
Are we doing what I heard a wonderful preacher talking, a wonderful sermon say, are we doing God's work? And are we loving our neighbor? And that was you, Casey. I remember that.
One of the things that we did learn at the border was when the border was open, people could work here and go back to their family, whether they stayed a week or a month or went back and forth every day. Once we closed that border, then it was too difficult. They didn't know if they could. So they started making the choice to stay in the United States and have to send money to their family and then try to get their family here. So it became more fraught going back and forth. So therefore, most of them are choosing to stay here because if you're fighting poverty, slavery, exploitation, you're going to want to come someplace where you can be safe.
And that's one of the reasons, and particularly in border communities. Border communities are different than our communities because when the border was more open, as Shelley said, people grandma and grandpa lived on one side of the border and mom and dad on another, and they would go to each other's homes for dinner and to be together or to work. There's a lot of multinational corporations, US owned, in right across in the Mexico area of the borderlands, and people would go across or come from Mexico up into the United States to work the service jobs that many people who are US citizens don't want to have. And so there's the business people in El Paso are saying, we want a system that works well. We need that to make money for our companies and our stockholders, and and so get a fair, just border policy. And that's one thing you can do is really be attentive and listen to news sources that doesn't exploit the situation and blow it up in that, but instead informs what's really happening in the immigration process. And then as you find out, advocate at local, state, and national level for fair and just, humane immigration policy and practice. And that's just a couple things, and we need to, it's 4:01, and I know my email address, just go onto the Synod website, Chatelaine at southeastminnesota.com, SEMN Synod.com or .org, it's on here, yeah. Please, any questions that you have, or if you're interested in any of the ministries of Amparo, if you're interested in the God Who Sees book study or a migrant journey, or to find out how do we start discerning, because there are so many different discernment processes in sponsorship. If your congregation wants to give some funds to either support congregations who said yes, and it's a one-time gift, or we purchase every quarter essential supplies for children who are in these faith-based shelters at the U.S.-Mexico borderlands. There are so many opportunities. Email me to find out more questions, or if you need to be connected with anyone on our panel. Thank you so much. Thank you.